name is Ndiboniswani Lukwareni, and I will be moderating the first part, and then the second part will be moderated by Dr. Manetsi. Let me start by thanking all present, especially thanking and acknowledging the presence of our former Speaker of Parliament, former Deputy President, Mebaleka Mbete, and also the founder and chair of the National Liberation Heritage Institute of South Africa. We are very pleased to have you here. Let me, in the same vein, also acknowledge the presence of the former Minister of Science and Technology, Dr. Mangena. It is indeed a privilege that we have accepted to be with us here. Let me acknowledge our own chairperson, Mr. Edgani Rubarani, the chairperson of National Heritage Council. Allow me to acknowledge the UNISA entourage. We are very pleased to see you here. Allow me to acknowledge the presence of the DSEC represented by Mr. Ivan Langefeld. Ivan, it's indeed a pleasure that you are here to bear support. I have seen the gallery of legends are also here with us. We are very much pleased that indeed you have joined us. There are also my colleagues from the National Heritage Council who are also here, but I will be running amiss if I don't acknowledge the presence electronically of Mr. Porano, who is the representative of the UNESCO Special Advisor and is also the former head of Museums and Heritage for Botswana. Mr. Variso, someone who has been supporting the initiatives of the culture and heritage space. He is the director of African World Heritage Fund and a staunch supporter of the activities of the National Heritage Council and its entities, of DSEC and its entities, sorry. Allow me to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Graham Domini, who is a council member at the National Heritage Council. Allow me to acknowledge my sister, little sister. I know there I said you're a big sister, but I thought you would just politely say you are a younger sister. Younger sister Jane Mufamadi, CEO of the Freedom Park. Our appreciation that you are here. We have obviously been joined very specifically by our students from both UNISA and the students from the University of Venda. We don't take it lightly that you have been here. We have also invited other stakeholders who might not been here yet, and I will acknowledge them as they come. So you are all very, very welcome, and I don't know what to say, but to just say, let me also acknowledge those who are from the media. Let me acknowledge those who will be entertaining us, those who have been saving us. I think that is a very, very big thing. I would say a hand of applause, but that will be going back to the 18th century because we've got professional musicians here. Azishe, bo musician kancane la.
Lachi paisaka zuki sikhumba sengqongqo. Vulani indlela kugabo kubumnyama. Bamba ngazibini singabi nejuju. Khanda namachiza konakala ukuhlala. Ha! Namhla sigagene kodwa ndinguyinongqawuse intombi kaMhlakazeni wadiliza intaba zikaXhosa. Diligube vlemvelo uTibujana. Isishuba soshubela abantwana ukhala khulula umlabantwana. Umgodi omdala wadida amantshontsho inkomo zikadibi inkomo zikasijekula. Inkomo zikanohambe ezadla intsimi kabhanqoza ikhukhuza zayitshayela zemka nengcambu. Zilambo Zibuyile inkomo zikatata Zibuyile inkomo zikatata Azibuyile hayi inkomo zikatata beziyolobola amavili oh yeah wow hayi Mbanamni nalonto ubonayo Kamazolwandla yayaluzela na Hayi Yipika kwintakenhle kwilizwe liphela yini namadoda Hayi Is it a daffodil in the Rocky Valley? Inyibi bintyanyambe qaqambileyo enqabene ezikhotyeni ngaphakathi kwamalolo kusini na Hayi Nguntu indlu kaAfrika Umntana esidima nesithozela nenzondelelo yokugcina uzinzo lweAfrika Nguntu the embodiment of humanity Kaloku lenti ngumntu ngabantu I am because you are because I am Atungwame nkruma ngenyimini I am not an African because I was born in Africa I'm an African because Africa was born in me Marcus Musa Garvey once said the people without the knowledge of their culture, their traditions, and their history of origins are like the tree without roots. Yonke London City, woncho makhawa sekhaya, woncho makhawekazi, woncho zintombi, woncho nani zinsizwa. Kambe kade kaloku kwanda kwaluwa ngumthakathi. Bekuyizoloku sigqushalaza siziqingela ikamva eliqaqambileyo amanqanaba siwagqithile iminqatsa sayiqabela singaxeleshe ngasemva kwaphela sakhoba safohlela ngezikrweqe zenzondelelo nenyaniso sibambe sigcine ukuzingca ngezithethe zakowethu Wojo National Heritage Council Wagcine njalo lamasiko Wojo University of South Africa hub of prestigious knowledge and wisdom Oh today it feels good to be an African Kaniyizele malawundini Kaniyizele malawundini Sithi ashe Sithi dumelang Sanbanani sizwe sikanyabela unyabela wangena eholweni waphuma eholweni wawuma ngevonderbom umutho mangazako Sithi ashe sizwe sakwethu Oh yina batsonga amashangani yina bathi abakuthongola shamuno sihluka shangungunyana ahey sihluka shangungunyana ndarimina ndovwa That is the beauty of being a South African today Atopics lika seme ngenyimini gamazwi phaku zizu jamaka sijadu ingqongqoliya kwaMbheki Inhlamena gwele okhakhelwa ngovya kwamathiba umalale ejongile emhlaca amagusha kwimilondo ekhaya elanxanxathi limaxhaka-xhaka elachoma amakhoba lamakhoba ngentshutshe nangoncumo emfazweni atsho adila izishimi lamadoda ngaxeshanye Thabo Mbeki once said with the words of great big Slika Seme hello I am an African I owe my being to the hills and the valleys the mountains and the clays, the rivers, the seas, the trees, the deserts, the flowers, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frost and in our latter days, no. It has thawed in the warmth of the sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. the crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lest by startling lightning, having the cause of both trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veldt. The dramatic shapes of the mighty Drakensberg, the soil-colored waters of the Ligwa, Iqelino Tugela, and the sands of the Kgalagadi have all been the panels of the set on the natural stage of which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. Remember, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Remember, we are the ones who have made it possible for the world markets to trade in gold, in diamonds, and the food our stomachs still in. Remember, we are the great-grandchildren of Nonghouse, the great-grandchildren of the warrior men and women that inside Sikukune led, the patriots in Pepu and Kachoyo took to battle, the soldiers Mushwashwa and Gungunyane taught never to dishonor the cause of freedom. Freedom for you is freedom for me. We come from all those who were transported from India and China, whose being solely the fact that they could provide physical labor. Those who taught us that we could both be at home but foreign. Those who taught us that the human existence itself demanded freedom as a necessary condition for human existence. Remember, we still owe our being to the Khoi and the San, whose desolate souls haunt the great, expansive, beautiful Cape, they who fell victims of the worst merciless genocide our native land has ever seen. They who, as the people, perished in the result. But today, as the country, South Africa, we still keep inaudible and audible silence about these great ancestors of the generations that live, fearful to admit the horror of the former deed, seeking to obliterate from a memory a cruel occurrence, which in its remembering should teach us not, and never be inhuman again. Remember, memory is our heritage. It helps us to preserve our cultural integrity, sustain our heritage intelligence, and maintain our traditional protocols. Mandiniaka bafaz balenda obon tagat. Decham. Let us all affirm and say, I am an African. I am an African. Yes, we are one. We are one water, one earth, one spirit, one soul, one mighty Gondwana land.
Thank you very, very much. I know people like me who are not endowed with good lungs wouldn't even try to imitate what you're doing without coughing 10 times for every sentence. Thank you very, very much. Sibonge kakhulu Bhubezi. Okay, as you are aware, culture and heritage forms the bedrock of our convictions, and it is the key to our value system, and it determines our perseverance and our aspirations for the things that we achieve. And for those who want to derail us, it becomes a very useful and effective code in reprogramming what you are. When properly implemented or applied, it is the culture and heritage that minimizes the corrective hand of the justice system. It minimizes the activities of the spiritual leaders. It minimizes the effect of the health system. It minimizes the interventionists of the social services system. Because if you follow your culture and your heritage, all these issues and anomalies get addressed in the process. There are those amongst us who say it's very difficult to have a common culture or a heritage in a country with 11 languages and so many other cultures. And those are the people who are just full of excuses or they've not done their research. We are not the worst case. There are countries with as many as 500 languages, 1,000 ethnic groupings. For those who have been to Brazil, they will know that there are no less than 200 languages. There are also occurrences of uncontacted populations, but still under Lula da Silva, they strive to have a common heritage. And to an extent, some of these were achieved. So today my job is very easy. It's just to usher in the speakers. And the first one that will be speaking here is none other than the representative from our shareholder department, Mr. Ivan Langerfeld. If you can please come to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, Dr. Lukwareni. Good afternoon, everyone, and really great being with you this afternoon on this very special occasion. Former Deputy President and National Speaker, Me Paleka Mbete. Our guest speaker this afternoon, Dr. Mangena. The management of the University of South Africa, the management of the National Heritage Council, our moderator, Dr. Manetsi, our esteemed panelists, honorable guests, staff and students of UNISA, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ivan Langeveld. I am in the Heritage Branch of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. I have the honor this afternoon to represent the Acting Director General, Mr. Vusitemba Ndima. The Department of Sport, Arts and Culture is very honored to be invited to this gathering at UNISA this afternoon by the National Heritage Council to be part of our Heritage Celebration Colloquium. In welcoming all of you to this heritage talk under the theme Recognizing and Celebrating the Cultural Wealth of Our Nation, I want to focus on a specific aspect of our cultural wealth. We are celebrating this Heritage Month of 2022 under the theme Celebrating the Legacy of Solomon Linda and South Africa's Indigenous Music. September 2022 marks 60 years since the passing of Solomon Popoli Linda on 8 September 1962. Linda was a South African musician, singer, and composer, best known as the composer of the song Mbube, which later became the popular The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and gave its name to the Mbube style of isicathamiya, a cappella music. These isicathamiya competitions provided entertainment and were a major form of social gathering for many black South Africans during the dark days of colonialism and apartheid. When black people were not allowed to enjoy most social and entertainment amenities that were reserved for white South Africans. While working for Gallo Record Company, Linda improvised the song Mbube, which became a major success for both Linda and the Evening Birds. Black people living in Johannesburg constantly needed money to pay for their accommodation and livelihoods. It was these circumstances that compelled Solomon Linda to sell the rights to the song to Gallo Music for 10 shillings, soon after the recording was made. Despite the popularity and wide use of his Mbube song, Solomon Linda died impoverished in 1962 of kidney failure. In 2005, the then Department of Arts and Culture assisted the heirs to Solomon Linda to lodge an international lawsuit to reclaim the rights to the Mbube song and its adaptations that include Wimawe and The Lion Sleeps Tonight. A settlement was reached in 2006 between Linda's estate, Disney, and Abilene Music Company, which meant that the Linda estate was to receive payment for past use of the Lion Sleeps Tonight. However, the quantum of the financial settlement was kept confidential. In August 2022, our Minister, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, provided the application, approved the application to rename the small town of Pomeroy to Solomon Linda as recognition and tribute to this immensely talented musician who was born in this small town in KwaZulu-Natal. Please, let's celebrate that important recognition of this great musician and contributor to our indigenous music. The renaming of Pomeroy to Solomon Linda is part of government's mandate to transform South Africa's naming landscape, and I dare say South Africa's heritage landscape more broadly. It is also part of the Truth and Reconciliation's recommendations for symbolic reparations. Let me end this welcome with what could be seen as a provocation. Solomon Linda's contribution to the development of South Africa's indigenous music far outweigh the contribution of the colonial general Sir Pomeroy Colley, who led an ill-fated attack on the Boer army at Majuba Hill during the Anglo-Boer South African War. I thank you very much and a warm welcome to this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ivan Langeveld, Mr. Ivan Langeveld. It's extremely appreciated that you found time amidst your extremely busy schedule to come and bless us here. The moment we have been all waiting for our keynote speaker to address us, it's nearing. And we have gone all out in the spirit of African excellence to find you a speaker like no other else. Our speaker today will be Dr. Mangena, who we worked very hard to bring here to address us today. Dr. Mangena needs no introduction, but if I'm to just summarize his active life in few sentences, he's one of those who managed to straddle between excelling in academics and the passion and sacrifice that are needed by the political activities. Dr. Mangena, in line with him doing, not being obsessed with simple things, went for a BSc degree in the University of Zululand back then, but his passion and commitment for politics and the activities of his student days demanded that during those days he be taken out of school. And being taken out of university, I'm not talking about someone coming to ask you nicely to drop off and go to work. No, going straight to jail, Robben Island, because these activities in the universities were found to have violated the notorious Section 6 of the Terrorism Act. So in a way, during those years, we would say we have got terrorist Dr. Mangena amongst us. Dr. Mangena didn't give up because of the bad things that come with incarceration. Even when he was there, he continued with his passion, and he completed his degrees in mathematics. And doing that even when he was released, and to show you how ruthless the erstwhile apartheid regime was, it then saw it fit to banish him to his home of Makwalere. Banishing, for those who were born in the 2000 years, is to say that this is your parents' house and you shall never leave this gate without being pointed by a bullet or being lost forever. So that is what Dr. Mangena was subjected to. Just that, and we are not talking these big houses that you have now, where you can basically play golf in your house. It's just around 250 squares of a house, and the banishes say Dr. Mangena must never leave that. That didn't demoralize him. And he went on to chair, as you know, the AZAPO, because he was schooled in the black consciousness politics. Mr. Mangena's passion in education saw him being honored by various universities that if I am to count with my fingers, I would run short of fingers. And I would start with Stellenbosch. I would go to Univen. I would go to the Vaal University of Technology. I will go to this University of UNISA. And many, many others. I'm actually running short of fingers, Dr. Mangena, to count all the universities that have honored you. But of course, you know him mostly as the first Minister of Science and Technology. And that was the cap to say that you are an astute politician, but you know, usually if you're a politician, you would think you would do history and biblical studies as I have done. No, Dr. Mangena does his politics, but he excels in science and technology, to a point where he has even chaired the ministerial task teams for the SADC on science and technology. And a lot of the firsts, like the SAT technology, came during his leadership. So this is the jewel that you, African child, know to be as proud as the Buvezi poet was here when we have brought this type of caliber to address you. And if you can't take something from a man of a caliber like Dr. Mangena, you might battle in life to see anything good in any other person. So that is the reason that we've brought you. The Lioness addressed us. It was also, you can see that we have picked up Indlovukazi to address you. You could see when she was walking to stage, it was like she was saying, hey, well. So we brought you, Ivan, here. You could see with the powers of the DG, and he addressed and welcomed you. Now, Buvezi Mangena. Tatale stage, uschele kahle.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lokoreni, for the wonderful introduction. But I'm Mangena, not Mangena. But you are forgiven because in Chivenda, that's how it is named. In Zulu and in Isxhosa, they call it Mangena. And Mandebele also, but you are forgiven. Thank you very much. Baitsu, led by Me Balagambete, and the other speakers who have been announced. Good afternoon, Dumelang, Sanbonan. I was taken aback when I first saw the invitation to speak at an event like this with its kind of content. As we have just heard, that initial thought said someone with some academic training in the humanities would have been an obvious choice, unlike someone like me whose training is entirely in the natural sciences. But then another thought came that said, if at the ripe age of 75 years, I'm unable to talk about our culture and heritage, it might mean we are probably in deep trouble. At that age, everyone ought to be able to say something about the subject, even if it is at the level of lived experience. But a much more compelling reason why I accepted the invitation is that those of us with a bit of education, especially the black intelligentsia, are the biggest traitors when it comes to the observation, practice, protection, and promotion of black culture in all its facets. If things were left to us, our dances, our music, our attire, languages, and cuisine would have been long died. We owe it to ordinary people that we can still point to something as our culture. The implications of this is that there is a lot to lament in as far as the health of South African culture, which consists of the African component, the European component, the Indian component, or what other people called component, is concerned. The totality of South African culture and heritage are severely malnourished by the feebleness of the African component thereof. Colonialism was not only brutal and physical in the physical sense of military conquest, forceful occupation of the territory of the colonized, exploitation of the natural resources and labor of the colonial subjects, but it was much more coercive and systematic in its drive to destroy the languages, religion, heritage, and culture of its indigenous victims. Through religious conversion and teaching, and the education provided by the colonizers, they insidiously sought to undermine the very character of black people by denigrating and undermining their culture, religious practices, and heritage. So, black people who converted to the religion of the colonizers sought to distance themselves as much as possible from their own culture, languages, and heritage. They sought to fashion themselves in the image of their colonizers at the expense of themselves. They became perpetual students of that culture with no hope whatsoever of ever being like the masters. So, asking someone with academic training in the humanities would probably not have been any more beneficial than inviting someone like me. The theme of our discourse today calls on us to recognize and celebrate the cultural wealth of our nation. Indeed, we must. But for it to be recognized, it must exist. And in order to be celebrated, it must be embraced, cherished, and loved by the owners of that culture. That is not generally evident today. If it was, we would be living a different reality in South Africa. Culture and heritage is the sum total of what and how a community or people eat, drink, how they dress, how they get married, how they name their children, how and what they worship, how they sing and dance, their artistic expression and artifacts. And most of these things are, of course, intertwined with their languages. More importantly, they provide a worldview for that community and guide their everyday living. People do not meet every now and then to decide how they are going to eat or drink anything. That's long established. For instance, the latest Lesego Semenya, aka Lesda Chef, in his cookery book titled Dijo, says that Africans are communal eaters. If the African component of the South African population was not overwhelmed by colonial conquest, we would have expected to see the number of restaurants in the country approximating the more than 80% that this section of the population constitutes. The cuisine in those restaurants, the ambience, the layout, and this communal eating culture would manifest itself. Considering the ever-changing culture of nature, while the character would be manifest, we would probably see modifications, tweaking, and innovations in the menus and presentation of the food. We would see chefs bringing their creativity in that environment and giving us varieties we could enjoy, but the cuisine would remain essentially African. However, this is not the case. Instead, we have no African restaurants in South Africa. We have Italian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, French, and other such restaurants in this country. Do we see anything wrong with that? In fact, if you opened an African restaurant in any city in South Africa, Africans are not likely to patronize it. Why? Because they have been conditioned by colonization to worship other people's food and culture at the expense of their own. I understand we are going to eat today. Just see and watch what we are, and the manner in which we will eat the food. We have a strange situation in our country where there was a debate on how much South African music should be played on our airways. Really? If we respected ourselves and our culture, such a debate would not even arise. Any radio or television station that did not play enough of our music would have found itself with a very thin listenership that would not make sense for it to continue broadcasting. To make matters worse, there is no colonialist holding a gun to our heads demanding we should play less of our music. We have psychological conditioning to thank for that we should not love our music as much as we love that of the colonialists. One radio station in the stable of our public broadcaster has a program that plays African music for an hour or two on Saturdays and Sundays, but that comes at 4 o'clock in the morning. How many people are awake and listening to the radio at that time? Since the advent of democracy, indigenous languages have seen a rapid decline. African languages departments have closed at all our universities. Books in these languages are no longer being published. Go into any bookshop today and look around. You will not find a single book in indigenous languages. There used to be classics in all these languages, which have all disappeared. You can't find them anywhere today. You cannot sustain, let alone develop languages, if there is no writing and publishing in those languages. By implication, our young are not reading much, if anything at all, in their home languages. With language barrier being a carrier of culture, rituals, mores, traditions, and heritage, it all tells us that we are in deep trouble. This is demonstrated by the fact that more and more of our youngsters take pride in not being able to speak or write or read their home languages. Or go to funerals and ask them to read something or talk about the departed. They speak only in English and they insist. And those that do not have the language would not have the mores, rituals, traditions, and culture associated with it. With these unknown or weak, the basics of everyday community living are undermined. These would include music, would include dancing, attitude, and handling of the dead, our respect of the graveyard, respect for the older person, attitude to people of the opposite sex, etc., etc. Once these are gone or weakened, society loses shape, structure, character, and identity. What follows would be social and behavioral discourse, the likes of which we see in our society today. You just need to watch Parliament and see whether the brawl, physical and verbal, that you see there can rival any bar in the country. Among other things, colonialism has sought to condition us to look down on those things that belong to us and give us an identity. Its success in this regard manifests itself in the fact that it is us who are constantly questioning and casting doubt on our natural heritage. There is no component in our population whose cultural practices are being questioned and doubt cast over them than that of the African people. The tragedy is that it is mainly Africans themselves who are leading the charge. Listen to the commentary and questioning on TV and radio of the Umkosi Womhlanga that takes place every September, involving Zulu maidens. Is it necessary in this day and age to have such a thing? Is it mainly us, and it is mainly us questioning it and casting doubt whether it's relevant or it's needed or not. It is mainly us questioning and casting doubt on the relevance of Mahadi or Lobola. You would have dramas or soapies written and broadcast by us, ridiculing and depicting this practice in such a way that induces disrespect. No other group's ways of marrying are subjected to this kind of treatment. You don't see anything treating the buying of rings and white wedding in the streets or in church to receiving the same treatment. To make matters worse, or even weirder, we go through the Mahadi and Lobola process and then do the Western way of rings and church weddings. We do the same thing twice and pay twice for the same thing. We don't seem to think we are properly married until and unless we satisfy the colonial part. That reflects a split personality that leaves us uncertain of who we are. Other people wed only once and through only one way, and that once is what gives them their identity. If we don't disregard our cultural practices, we undermine them through commercialization or allowing charlatans to scandalize them. Take Koma or Rukwaloka, for instance. Every year we are faced with absolute mayhem as boys die or are mutilated in what may be termed an industrial scale. When I went to Koma or Passage in 1957, there were 360 of us in that particular group. Not a single one of us died. This is because the passage was taken seriously by the community, such that all men in the village played their part, with roles determined by their hierarchy that was determined by their age, the time of their own passage, and standing in the community. Contrary to the glib reference to Koma or Rukwaloka as circumcision, it is a lot more than that. Circumcision is a tiny part of it. The main idea is to train young men into disciplined and responsible young adults, help them transit from boyhood foolishness to well-rounded young men who would stop a behavior akin to bushuburu or ubunkwenkwe. The cohort of men who went through the passage in a particular year tended to stick together and help one another through life and its vicissitudes. They would also call to order those of their classmates, quote unquote, who would, for instance, assault a woman. Thus, Koma was one of the practices through which society ordered, moderated, and modeled and organized itself. Culture, morals, traditions, and heritage give society philosophical underpinning that guide our everyday living as well as relationships with others in the world. Is the weakening of these practices perhaps responsible for the mess-up society we have become. No respect for the older person, no respect for the dead, the graveyard, and society in general. We see people erecting mikuku in graveyards, stealing or vandalizing tombstones, raping babies in their nappies, or grannies in the twilight of their lives. Who does that? Ke motho o jwang wa etsa ntho e so? These are not just criminal acts, but a grotesque demonstration of the death of isimilo in our society. A sense of what it is to be human and a member of society is lost. As our cultures and heritage are weakened, what are they being replaced with? Probably nothing, except perhaps crass materialism, narcissism, nihilism, and beastly behavior. It appears that the recognition and celebration of our culture and heritage is not just a nice thing to have, but a matter of great national importance in terms of governance, in terms of order, in terms of pride, identity, even life and death. We need to sustain, nurture, and strengthen our cultural practices. In order to do this, we should not only relegate our cultural expression to scattered little events where we have a little song and dance in September. Culture and heritage are not quaint, esoteric, and exotic things we visit once a year. They should be something that is evident and guides our day-to-day living. The totality of South African culture and heritage would be enormously boosted by the banishment of inferiority complexes among the African component of the population. This is the majority that was particularly targeted by slavery, colonization, and neocolonialism. With this component of our society standing tall again, so would the South African society as a whole boast of a robust and colorful culture. This means that our culture and heritage must be present in our educational system, in our health system, in governance, in entertainment, in communication, in eating, and in life in general. The culture and heritage must be loved, must be embraced, and cherished by almost all of us. Of course, these would be modified, that is, these cultures, by the march of time and changes in the world. What we cannot afford is a society bereft of culture and heritage. That's too ghastly to contemplate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My assessment couldn't have been put better, that we have brought you the lion of the lions, Nizizwe Langet. Let me use this opportunity again to thank our keynote speaker. You have not disappointed. I might have disappointed Dr. Mangena, but we will address it outside. Let me also thank the Department of Military Veterans. I've seen the representatives are here. Let me thank the Department of Education. I know we have got a program we do together and you are here. We have also invited municipalities as well as SALGA. And of course, there's also those who are funded by NHC. One of them is the Lopetema Foundation. I've seen their representative here. I've also seen the representative of Kara Institute. We were together yesterday. So we come to you, you also come to our events. I think that's how it works. I've also seen Bantu Abakulu, Wasebukhosini, Amangwe Royal Kingdom, Angazor Wapumile, but Stokoze Kakulu, you found time to come here. Matabane SRC Yase Pretoria, Sbonge Kakulu. Other organizations like Linda Mathe Management was here. Midlands Tourism, we appreciate your presence. And then creative industry consultant were also here. Masingi Cultural Village is not a small thing that you are here. I've also seen a representative from Ukongolose, religious leaders as well, book publishers, activists, researchers, etc., etc. Dr. Mangena, you have spoken passionately about us not being proud of our own heritage. And it touched me to an extent where I have to give you a very sad narrative, and then we will see how it gets interpreted. February 2019, I attended the court proceedings in Thohoyandou. The plaintiff was vendor speaking, the accused was vendor speaking, the magistrate was vendor speaking, everyone in the crowd was vendor speaking, the lawyer for the plaintiff was vendor speaking, the lawyer for the accused was vendor speaking, but the proceedings were conducted in English. Can you beat that? So how does English come in a court where there isn't even a single person who does not understand Venda? But that does not sound peculiar or funny to us, because those who conquered us started by conquering our minds. And when your mind is conquered, you cost a lot. That's part of conquering our minds through the technology. Let me not waste time. Let us allow Ndlovukazi Buvezi to entertain us. Nazoke.
So I'm not going to be conducting these proceedings with English. I will join the vendor crowd and say, Ndima Siari, Ndima Degwane. I'm living on different zones, global zones, baby, you know what I'm saying? Ulagwetini. Niphi into zakuthi?
Sikhona sis.
Where I come from, and where we are, we still have the ritual passages of men going to the mountains. And we shall resolve the negligence by coming together as one. Sinyukintaba, sisile sizalise ingqayi, and call to our great ancestors. I need a little bit of a volume because this is the loudest song where everybody celebrates when our boys come back from the mountains. They say when power meets power, the less power shall bow. Ula kwetini, ula mdanam, ula noyongo mama, naba chalingomo, achokaga mazaleni benyuke mthonyani. Nabachalingomo achokaga mazaleni benyuke mthonyani. Abafazi nga, amadoda nga, amadoda ebuhlanti ngokwenzwa indoda. Amadoda nga, amadoda ebuhlanti ngokwenzwa indoda. Can we sing it together? Ula kweti nikabawo. Ula kweti nikabawo. Pokwi banjiwe, ibhokhwe inetyala ibhokhwe inetyala ibhokhwe ibanjiwe ibhokhwe ibanjiwe ibhokhwe inetyala. You can clap those hands. Ibhokhwe inetyala hayibo. Yizela biyizeli. Ngela. Ibhokhwe inetyala. Ibhokhwe ibanjiwe. Ibhokhwe ibanjiwe mntana. Ibhokhwe inetyala. Hayibo. Ibhokhwe inetyala. Ibhokhwe inetyala mama. Shaka. Nabatshala inkomo. Ula kwethi. Ula mntanam. Ula noyongo. Kanize naye mabhongo naye. Hamba sitenge come. Hey. Hey. Chaka. Kula mntanam. Kula. Inimba mayibanye abafazi hayibo. Today you are coming to build the Ark of Covenant. No death in the mountains. As we gather in this place, sakhitya yomnqophiso, sinqophisana noSomandla, sinqophisana nomvelinqangi, sithi no more death in the mountains. Let there be integrity and dignity around our traditions and cultures. Haibo! If you agree with me, let me see those hands. Kula mntanam, kula kwethi, kanize na ye mabhongo, nayo mabhongo enhliziyo, kanize na yo mabhongo, nayo mabhongo enhliziyo. Kula kwethini, kula kwethini ka, kula kula kanize na yo mabhongo, nayo mabhongo enhliziyo. Yizani nayo, yizani nayo, yizani nayo. Hey, shake it. Hey. We say bring them alive. Pride of Africa. Sons and daughters of the soil. You, the ones that have got wisdom. You who speak to the great mighty ancients of our times. You are the pride of our nation. Kanize na yo mabhongo, nayo mabhongo enhliziyo. Thank you.
Zimnandi le ngoma zalo mama kakhulu. If somehow you find yourself not moving any part, even if it's just to tap or just, then you must maybe consider sending your own selfie to the police, because it might be indicating to a very severe disorder psychologically, with all due respect. So that was on a lighter moment. From now onwards here, Ms. Dr. Manetsi will take over. Dr. Manetsi.
Thank you, Program Director. Before we proceed, let me also take this opportunity to extend a warm heritage greeting. You look stunning, you look fabulous, as how my children would have it, or they would just simply say, you look cool. So for that, give yourself a round of applause. Thank you once again, Program Director, our CEO. Without further ado, really, I wouldn't waste much of your precious time, but I must also add that we are exceedingly excited to host you here, and we are honored by your presence here. We know that you should have been at home, you know, with your families and so on, but you decided to honor our event, and we are truly, truly appreciative of that. Now we've entered another phase of our program, which is gonna be led by a panel of distinguished speakers and guests who will take us through various interesting facets of our heritage, but most importantly, they will be really engaging us on ways in which we can promote, safeguard, and conserve our heritage. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite our panelists to the stage so that they can assume their posts, so that we are able to start with the main aspect of the program, which is about the dialogue itself. Remember, we said that we are here to empower ourselves. We have to learn from each other. Each one help the other. So this is a moment that really we have been building up to assimilate, but most importantly, a moment in which we said that we should actually use heritage as a shared resource to empower each other. Let's welcome our guests on stage. Let's give them a round of applause. Amongst our panelists, as you would appreciate, we have Dr. Graham Domini, who's joining us. We've got Umama Ubaleka Mbete. We also have Mr. Variso from the Africa World Heritage Fund. We also have our colleague and sister from the Freedom Park, Ms. Mufumadi. We are also joined virtually by our colleague from Botswana, Mr. Porano. I'm not too sure what's happening with the mic here, but I'm sure I'm audible enough. But we will start now with this part of our program, a very exciting part of our program, again, that will reiterate and also take the discussion further from where our keynote address left, Ntate Mangena. We will have this in a more strategic, but also more, it will flow in a logical manner. So the way in which we're gonna do this is that we'll take our speaker, our first speaker, who will just give us their reflections along the theme and topic that we've allocated them. And that will be a 10-minute talk. And from there, we will give an opportunity for another speaker to come and reflect as well. And then the way in which we're gonna do this is that we'll take all the presentations, and thereafter we will open the floor for discussions, reflections, and also questions as well. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite to the podium our first panelist, a speaker of note, a scholar, an archivist, a heritage practitioner, an author, and a historian. He's been at the helm of various government institutions, in particular the National Archives of South Africa, and leading the good work that has happened over time. And he's got a wealth of knowledge and experience in management of cultural heritage in South Africa, but most importantly, the whole conservation using repositories, archival resources to ensure that our heritage is protected for the current and future generation. He's also been very instrumental also in the conservation of the Timbuktu manuscripts. You'll recall that this has been a very important flagship project also for the country. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite to the podium Dr. Graham Dominy, our council member, to come and address us. And he'll be speaking on the place of cultural heritage in South Africa's diverse society and Africa and the world agenda. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sawubona, mjaniwena, goeiemiddag. Bonjour, monsieur. I am very, very honored to be asked to speak today in such a distinguished lineup of speakers, including Dr. Mangena and Mbeti, who have made such tremendous contributions to our country. I'm going to pick up on something that Dr. Mangena said, the sense of being human. But I'd like to start by reading a poem by a famous, maybe I should read it silently, a famous German poet, Bertolt Brecht. Fortunately, I'll read it in English. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books you will find the name of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon, many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold glittering Lima did the builders live? Where the evening that the wall of China was finished, where did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Babylon, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still bawled for their slaves. I begin with this quotation from the renowned German poet and playwright Bertolt Brecht because it poses critical questions about the inclusiveness of heritage. And I think it says something the opposite to what Dr. Mangena was saying. It talks about the denial of being human. For me, I lived through and fought cultural apartheid, particularly the absurdities of the tricameral parliament system. So I'm going to give you an anecdote from a time when fostering a divided heritage was at the heart of government policy. In the late 1980s, I was working on an exhibition on Griqua history in Kokstad, in East Griqualand. The exhibition had been reluctant. It was then incorporated into Natal from the Cape Province after the Transkei became independent. The organization I worked for, a government organization in Natal, had some very, 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 very conservative bosses. And the exhibition was reluctantly ordered by them because the tricameral parliament system required that token cultural services be extended to the colored community. So my boss thought that P.W. Botha was extremely left-wing. So that gives you an idea. That's the right-hand side of the stage. He was falling off it. But he was a nice man. The cultural artifacts available in Kokstad for the exhibition were fascinating, rich and varied. However, the bosses demanded that we tell the story of the whites separately. This was an impossibility because the history of all the communities of East Griqualand was totally intertwined. Would there ever have been such a community as the Griqua if South Africa's bloodlines had not intermingled? It was one of the complete petty absurdities of apartheid and illustrates how a fanatical focus on dividing heritage distorts our understanding of the past. As a token to our orders, we put up a line of rope through the middle of the exhibition. I was very pleased to see at the opening that all the visitors either ignored it or climbed over it until somebody took it down, so we, the workers, then lost it. But working on the exhibition, we had to face the question that Bertolt Brecht asked. Who built East Griqualand? Every building there was the result of the work of people of various backgrounds working together. There was not a building, there was not a road, there was not a church, there was hardly a cultural object constructed solely by people of one race. And I don't say this to diminish the amazing tradition of the Griqua people, who are renowned carpenters and craftsmen. Their work is absolutely stunning, but they are part of a broader community. Intellectual and religious leadership was not the prerogative of one race or church either. However, the politics of control and of land was colonial, and the double or triple robbery of land was undertaken first by the colonial, then by the Union government, finally by the apartheid government. And that was the story we were not allowed to tell in the 1980s. I hope that little museum in Kokstad tells it now. Mercifully, that era is long behind us, but we need to understand it so as to ensure it never returns again in one form or another. For me, the Brecht quotation perfectly captures the inclusive and progressive approach to heritage that we must follow and promote in conserving our nation's culture. To do this means understanding our history, and so let us examine the relationship between history and heritage, because everywhere has a history and everywhere has a heritage. The word heritage is originally French, and it means something passed from previous generations, a tradition. It used to be fairly narrowly defined, but it today is much, much broader and could mean those things from the past which are valued enough today to save for future generations. And this implies a community-orientated approach to heritage. There is a long definition in the white paper, which I'm sure Mr. Langeveld would be able to read out off the top of his head. I won't read it out in full, but it covers intangible, tangible heritage from paleontology, biology, geology, sites of science, sites of history, sites of conflict, monuments, statues, historical buildings, underwater wrecks, even under the sea, architecture, cities, works of art, literature, music, oral tradition, ceremonies, rituals, performances, museums, and their documentation. And I'm an archivist, so that is important for me. And this provides the shared basis, the basis for a shared culture and creativity in the arts. The word history means the discovery, collection, organization, and presentation of information about past people, places, and events. But it's not fixed. The British historian Christopher Hill says history has to be rewritten in every generation, because although the past does not change. The present does. Each generation asks new questions of the past. So we need to preserve both the good and the bad. The fact that a little village in KwaZulu-Natal is going to be named after Solomon Linda is wonderful and inspiring. But we still need to know that there was once a stupid colonial general called General Pomeroy Colley to understand how we got from there to Solomon Linda. New questions have indeed been asked of South Africa's history and heritage since the advent of democracy in '94. I believe that we need to underpin this questioning by positioning South Africa's rich, diverse, but interwoven heritage within the context of the right to human dignity, as Dr. Mangema suggested. The Constitution states everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Furthermore, the state may not discriminate, directly or indirectly, on grounds of race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience. Chairperson, I've run out of fingers. Language, birth, I'm going to add, etc. But the Constitution states, even more importantly, the right to human dignity. Everyone has inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected. And our work in the heritage sector comes from this constitutional imperative. People who understand and are proud of their heritage are people of profound dignity. It follows that respect for heritage is an essential part of respect for human dignity. And it is our responsibility to protect heritage and human dignity together. So, heritage doesn't exist in abstract. It doesn't exist simply in our individual approach to our past. It can be reflected at local, national, and international levels and is best linked in the context of human dignity. I'm going to give you an example from the proclamation of Robben Island as a World Heritage Site. UNESCO tells us Robben Island and its prison buildings symbolize the triumph of the human spirit, of freedom and of democracy over oppression. I think this demonstrates more clearly than I can the powerful link between South Africans' constitutional right to human dignity and as embodied in our constitution and heritage. So let me say something about the World Heritage System. There are 1,154 proclaimed World Heritage Sites across the planet. Only 96 are in Africa. The majority are, in fact, in Europe. Surprise, surprise. The 96 sites in Africa are scattered over 47 countries. There are 10 in South Africa. Given the fact that humanity evolved in Africa and our continent has the oldest human record on the planet and is home to some of the greatest cultural and national wonders in the world, it's clear that Africa's heritage has been significantly marginalized at a global level. So it's up to us. We have a lot of work to do. Can't blame anybody else. The wording on the Robben Island nomination is inspirational. But our task in the heritage field is to move from inspiration to perspiration. So how do we move from a declaration that encapsulates the human spirit to making things happen on the ground? Let's look at a practical example, but it's not from South Africa. An Australian heritage organization, Heritage Perth, described its role particularly well. The role of Heritage Perth is to present the heritage of the city in a positive way, demonstrating it as a valuable social, environmental, and economic asset. The link between heritage and human dignity is implicit in this definition, with its emphasis on heritage as a social asset. It also satisfies the needs, this definition, the Australian definition, of the number crunchers, the bean counters, the treasury, the municipal officials, by describing heritage as a valuable and as an economic asset. Many years ago, during the ACTAG process in the 90s, if not even earlier, if I remember correctly, perhaps Edgar can assist me, it was calculated that cultural and heritage sites received more visitors than the Kruger National Park and the other flagship sites of what is now Sand Parks. This demonstrates for the Philistines that preserving heritage can pay its way and put food on tables, as well as providing food for the soul. So, from our national government processes, let's look at the African Union. The African Union's Agenda 2063 is inspired by 7 aspirations. I won't read them out in full. It's prosperity, integration, good governance, democracy, peace, security, and then I'll read number 5, Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. And from there it goes on to people-driven developments. So it's all interlinked. The 5th of these aspirations is most important for our purposes. Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, value, and ethics. As a democracy, South Africa supports both the United Nations and the African Union's founding documents. Our mission is to preserve and promote our diverse common heritage. Our mission to preserve and promote our diverse common heritage is located at the heart of humanity's aspirations for a better world. However, this does not come easily, and the struggle must continue. One of the earliest and strongest expressions of the values and ethics highlighted in the aspirations of the African Union was the Freedom Charter, adopted at Kliptown in 1995. It's too long to read out here, but I would like to highlight the ringing phrase, "South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white." This affirms our common national heritage, and it rang out at a time when the apartheid government was determinedly separating and suppressing people on the basis of race and color, and elevating white culture and heritage above everything else, particularly Afrikaans culture and heritage, which in its turn had been oppressed by the British. The inclusive Freedom Charter inspires us all 70 years later. But the apartheid government regarded the Freedom Charter as an act of treason, and shortly thereafter, having arrested everybody it could, began the notorious treason trial. This was a failure, and all the accused, again people of all races, were acquitted. A few years later, on 21 March 1960, the Pan-Africanist Congress organized a march against the pass laws in Sharpeville, and the notorious massacre followed at the hands of the police. Then there was a state of emergency, the proclamation of an illegitimate republic, and the African National Congress and the Pan-African Congress were banned. The ANC informed Umkhonto we Sizwe on the 16th of December 1961, and the following year, the MK's leadership was arrested at Lilies Leaf, and the Rivonia trial followed. This had been preceded by the capture of Nelson Mandela in KwaZulu-Natal near Howick. And we, the NHC, celebrated the 60th anniversary of this last month. The surviving leadership of the liberation movements went into exile, and the internal leadership went to Robben Island, including Dr. Mangala. This brings us back to the declaration of the island as a World Heritage Site, dedicated to the triumph of the human spirit over oppression, and the establishment of freedom and democracy in the Rainbow Nation, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu once baptized us. However, I do not want to say the end, and they all lived happily ever after. Before we unpack the state of our heritage debates in the 2020s, let us look at the horrifying abuse of heritage internationally, as can happen when heritage is divorced or torn from its twin, human dignity. In many places of conflict, heritage resources are specifically targeted by militants and armies. Nearly finished. During the civil war in Syria in 2015, religious extremist insurgents destroyed the ancient ruins of Palmyra and beheaded the curator, Khalid al-Assad, who died as a cultural martyr and whose name should be respected by all the world. I would guess that Khalid al-Assad was a Muslim, although there is a significant Christian community in the area and they share names. Yet he died in defense of monuments of our pre-Christian and pre-Islamic past because he recognized Palmyra's universal importance. The ancient city had also been defended 2,000 years ago against the Roman emperors by Queen Zenobia, so it also recognized the role of women in the human story. 12 years earlier, from 2015, during the invasion of Iraq, 2003, the American army parked its tanks right on top of the ruins of Babylon, a World Heritage Site. Besides destroying cultural heritage in Iraq, the American armed forces also enabled the illicit traffic in cultural property during their occupation, and Iraqi museums were gutted of their precious contents. In defense of the American heritage community, there were strong protests at the protests of the American military, but to little avail. And as we speak today, heritage sites, churches, museums, schools, and libraries are reportedly being targeted and destroyed in the ongoing war in Ukraine. The common denominator in these international cultural tragedies is the lack of respect for human dignity, no matter how the cultural atrocities are justified ideologically. And this lack of respect has two roots: greed and power and ignorance. We are not immune to this in South Africa, and the NHC has been debating the controversial Two Rivers Park development along the Liesbeek River in Cape Town. It's probably fair to say that greed motivates the developers and power the local authority, but it is the ignorance that I want to focus on here. The battle between developers and conservationists is still raging in the courts, but when one victory went the way of the developer stood on the steps of the court in Cape Town and said triumphantly, "What is heritage? There is no heritage here. It is an open space." Now, it's a huge leap from a greedy and ignorant developer to a paranoid autocrat raining death and destruction down on a neighboring country. But the mindset is similar. Power and greed are the motivation, and there's a total lack of respect for human dignity motivating both individuals. I wanted to avoid these tragedies. We need to take inspiration from what President Thabo Mbeki said at his first inauguration on June the 16th, 1999. We will work to rediscover and claim the African heritage for the benefit especially of our young generations. He said a lot more, but I don't have time to quote it. I will just say one of my greatest privileges in my working career was to work on the Timbuktu Manuscript project, which embodied the essence of what President Mbeki hoped to achieve through the African Renaissance concept. The preservation of these precious manuscripts in one of the remotest cities of our continent was intended to demonstrate Africa's intellectual achievements, to deny and destroy the colonial myth of African illiteracy, and to highlight Timbuktu's prominence as a city of peace, learning, and commerce. Unfortunately, there was a rebellion in the Sahel in 2012. But out of the tragedy came another triumph of the human spirit. The people of Timbuktu themselves rescued their heritage and smuggled the manuscripts to relative safety in Bamako, the capital of Mali. As I said earlier, our struggle continues. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Graham Domini. I'm not going to reiterate what you have said, but safe to say that you are actually reminding us that we need to embrace our diverse cultural heritage, whether it's bad history or good history. but our task as public institutions charged with the responsibility of heritage management, we need to show diverse representation in our work. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this moment to welcome our next speaker. She is a cultural activist at heart. She has advanced the cause for women's rights and women's emancipation through the struggle. She has occupied various public portfolios in the public sector. She has served as our former deputy state president. She has also served as our former speaker in parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the podium Umamumale Gambete. Thank you very much.
Sanbonani. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In a world that's deaf to the voices of women, I choose to start by being the bearer of news about a rich hub of women from the SADC region, which I participated in yesterday in Cape Town, which started yesterday, called Isisele Senyati. Nyayazi Nyati. Have you ever heard into ethi inyati ibuzwa kwabaphambili? You ask those who are ahead, who have walked the road, where the buffalo is. Because the buffalo can be very bad-tempered. For me, the climax of day one activities was a moment when the 89-year-old Chief Omar Katrina Esau, the only living legend from the Khoi and San who still speaks their original language and consciously strives to keep it alive. She told the story of her childhood pain, endurance, and survival in a soft voice. The absence of bitterness in telling these harrowing experiences was noticeable. The whole gathering participated in learning and singing some songs in Omar Katrina's language. The session ended in the best part, which was when Omar was singing, laughing, and dancing in the glory of her culture from a community, a remote community, and I'm very glad because I've been there. Somewhere beyond, way beyond Kimberley, in the Kalahari. In fact, in a place where Mandela identified a piece of land for the Nama community and other Khoi and San people who had actually gone across the border to Namibia before South Africa was liberated. So she led us in singing, laughing, and dancing in the glory of this culture, of this remote community who live in the scorching sun in that place. That's a manifestation of the production and sustenance of a living human treasure, as personified by Omar Katrina. She'll be turning 90 next year. I hope we will be with her. Because the hub continues today and tomorrow. Today she'll be telling more stories, teaching more songs, sharing more wisdom. So that's where I want to start, to illustrate indeed the cultural wealth of this country. She's the last of 10 people who could speak her language, and she's the only one who's still alive. My second point is this, that given the marginalization of women's efforts historically in all life endeavors generally, all of us who consider ourselves Democrats, freedom-loving people, human rights activists, progressives of whatever sort, all of us must go out of our way to do our part to bring these efforts of women into full view, for us all not only to acknowledge them, but to give them the support they need in whatever ways. We must each commit ways to highlight women's contributions. Because we can't continue saying we're trying to build a free South Africa, and yet there's a section of the population whose efforts are continuously not only ignored, but in fact, they become the victims of the worst that can be visited on human beings, in the way women are killed, are abused all the time. That's not in keeping with anything cultural that anybody should be proud of. And yet this country is riddled right now with what has become known as GBV violence and femicide. So in this respect, I hereby use this opportunity to salute a woman who has worked tirelessly over the decades. Her name is Mandisa Monakali, the founder president of Ilita Labantu. It is Ilita Labantu that led to host Isisele Senyati. Ilita Labantu has existed, its work focused on being the sanctuary for abused women, victims of abuse in communities. Mandisa is a social worker, so she started Ilita Labantu out of seeing the problems in communities. Communities that really, when you hear stories like the Zamazamas on 8 women that were raped and all of that and disappeared, you know that those people have lost Ubuntu Babo. They are no longer behaving as human beings the way we know how human beings are brought up in their homes, in their families, and given the values of living and relating to other people like humans. Mandisa Monakali is the founder president of Ilita Labantu, people who care about people. The main focus of their work has been to be a sanctuary for women victims of abuse. Having been an admirer of the passion of these women for decades and in awe of what they've survived, I'm one of those saying it is time for a book about Mandisa Monakali herself. She was the prime mover and originator of Isisele Senyati, a reservoir of wisdom that I recommend this NHC and this university pays attention to. This one, the hub that's continuing, in fact, is the first of a series that's supposed to happen annually. My third point, and this is the point maybe where there's going to be a collision caused with the chairperson, because I wish to share an understanding of this universal value called Ubuntu, which in my understanding is a guiding principle of life, which has been the basis of my experience from where I draw lived perspective. I can only say it comes from my upbringing and maybe the more than 5 decades of working with people I could learn from. Respect your elders. That Emangena said that. Respect your fellow humans. Every child is my child. So when you see a child doing something wrong in the streets, you don't leave them alone because they are not yours. You know, they know their parents. Every child is my child. You take responsibility for wrong that you see. It does not matter that it's not your child. And that child must know that every adult, every elder is their elder, is their parent. And therefore, the advice, the chastising is as valid from a person they do not know as it is when meted out by their own biological parents. That's what Ubuntu teaches us. Now, the story, there are a couple of stories I want to share here very briefly. Simply because, for me, it illustrates how this set of principles, guiding principles of daily life, helped me in what could have been tricky situations if I had allowed them. And I had not allowed myself to be just taken through daily life and relate to human beings on the basis of this menu of values. I arrived in an estate in Cape Town, yes, when I became deputy speaker. And in this particular corner of the estate, you know the estate I'm talking about, that Emangen. In this particular corner, there are 3 houses. 2 are ANC deployees. The 3rd one is an elder from a different political party. So automatically I get to be welcomed by my older brother, the late John Tlantla. So of course he dispenses advice based on his own trade in life, which was security inclined. So he tells me that I must give strict instructions to the children never to go there, to the other home, which of course I didn't know, I couldn't find words to say it to the children. I didn't know how to say, don't go to that house, because how do you explain that? That is in my own world. So, of course, I have a boy, some people know, called Duma. Duma, you can't stop from relating to other human beings. He loves people. So 1, 2, 3, he was in that house. And in fact, he got there and did something wrong because he grabbed something, I don't know what, a chocolate he found on the table. So I got told that Duma took a chocolate from that house. So I had to chastise him and all of that. But the point of the story is that the relations that started to develop with the elder who was occupying that home were based on my upbringing of respect your elders. And my respecting this elder does not base itself on asking which denomination, which church does he go to, where does he go to pray, and it's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with the fact that he's an elder. That's how I grew up. So I relate to the elder as an elder to this day. One time I was invited to the party that the elder had founded at some point in the history of South African politics. And I scratched my head, must I go there? Am I going to go there? What will I, when I get there, will those people actually accept me? I'm invited though. I did end up going there, and I enjoyed the evening. And I told them that, yay, I cracked my head about coming here, because I was wondering, how am I going to, because what informs our daily judgments, relations, assumptions, thoughts, and therefore the basis for how you relate to the next human being is the noisy political commentary in the air every day, every minute. I had a good evening because I related to the elder as my elder who had invited me, and I had enjoyed the company of all the people who attended that. That is my neighbor, Makelwane. To this day, we call each other Makelwane. I was invited the other day to the launching of his foundation. I just couldn't attend, unfortunately. The other story is a story of a woman who was taken by COVID, called Treason. She arrived at an NEC meeting and told me a story about a dream she had had, and I featured in this dream, but we've got to go to communities that are riddled by violence and take prayers for peace. Before she passed on, we at least did 4 such community prayers in violence-ridden places in Johannesburg, in Soweto. We went to KZN. The last one we did was one in Jozini. You know the beautiful place that is at the border of South Africa, Mozambique, and Swaziland. I spoke to the premier of the province to explain that I have this invitation and I'll be going to this prayer, community prayer. I talked to the chairperson and the secretary of the province. They accepted, all of them agreed. A person I never met, but who came from my party, was the regional chairperson who was de-campaigning and in fact took his loud hailer and went around the community telling them that they actually should not attend this community thing. It's a community prayer of the other party that are enemies. Now, the structure of these community prayers were the following. First, the youth in the area would approach Priza and ask her, please to bring a prayer. They are tired of seeing people killing each other in the community. And Priza wanted me more because I had a responsibility of being a person that cannot be associated with one party or another as speaker, your responsibility makes you non-partisan. So I happily went there and I heard this thing about this regional person who was decampaigning, and I couldn't be bothered. We went in, started the program, and in the community, it would be a multi-sectoral team of community leaders, starting with taxi owners, women, youth, traditional leaders, traditional healers. All those sectors would come together to plan and organize the program that you would just come and fit into. Once the youth have approached Prizer then organizes the rest and organizes the people who will receive us from the community to bring peace in communities, so that communities started to discover themselves and their internal resources, and therefore human resources that could bring peace among them. It so happened that the mayor in that place was from the opposition party. But we had a beautiful prayer, and all these sectors spoke. Everybody contributed. At the end, there were cultural performances. And there was food. And that food, Ntate Mangena, was the local food. There was istambu, there was ucheke, there was meat and the vegetables that you would expect in any local community or home. What I took away from Ejozini that day is how people were welcoming and warm, and almost not believing that here was an ANC leader sitting among them. And because I stayed afterwards, I didn't do this thing of speaking and then dashing off to your car. I stayed, listened to the music, watched the performances, and we sat and had a good afternoon. We ate together because we were together about peace in the community, order in the community, and finding who we are and being able to relate as human beings. Sibe nobuntu. Siyeke ukuba yizilwane. My last one in the stories. So unfortunately from Jozini, after that, some leaders of the opposition wanted to cross to where I come from, and yet I didn't go there to recruit anyone. But that's what followed me. And as a result, it interfered with the next prayer, arrangement we were trying to follow up on Msinga. I don't know if you people know the name Msinga. In KZN, taxi violence dynamics, Msinga is a particularly, I am determined that one day we will go to Msinga. We didn't go that time because as a result of this wish to cross over by the people who were affected by us at Jozini, now some elders Msinga said, lo mama lo, uyingozi. And yet that was not my intention. So sisazo Msinga, ngoxolo nomthandazo ukuqhubekela nje phambili ukuthi sibuyise ubuntu bethu siye kukulwa ngoba siyazi into esiyilwelayo. My last story here is a short one, and it's about the years I spent with my big sister, who's now 90, Frini Jinwala, with whom I worked in Parliament. There were times I cried. That's how difficult it was. She's a very difficult character. But one thing I learned from Frini: respect what you were told by your elders culturally and in terms of your traditions. I watched how Frini did everything ngokwesikubo. When they were marrying the younger couples, the younger children in the family, they did it the way their culture does it. They were never taken off track by Western culture. So I observed that and I admired that. Even when we were burying her mother was sitting with us in a tray, and we all came, the community or at the estate, to Frini's house, and we were with her, sizokhala kanye naye, and the old lady is lying there in the tray, looking peaceful, and there was this priest, Oaebonga. Same thing she was doing here. But we were then told, bakhuluma ngamagama abadala bala beqhamuka khona. So he went on for an hour at least, calling on their ancestors, telling them that the old lady has left us on this side. She's on the way, that side she comes from, and he carried on for an hour. I learned a lot from that. Hlonipha izindlela owafundiswa zona kini. Respect the ways of your ancestors. Now, I am trying my best to share with you in such a manner that I can also cover some of the questions which are generally about political will, about resources and policy. I think opportunities to redeem ourselves in terms of getting back on track and prioritizing community perspectives in the dispensing of resources. I think therein lies an issue, the dispensing of resources. Because if we deny our people in the villages, in the townships, in the communities that are really still obviously the poorest, how do we expect them to be able to keep up with the ability to respect themselves and who they are as Bantu? So I think we should enable local communities to participate in the free expression, and let us create the best ways possible to have dignified conditions for our people that they deserve in a free South Africa. So I think community centers, even in my rural village, Mkanduli, it's important for my rural community to be able to have a community center, community arts center. So I will just say one word about NALISA, which is the National Liberation Heritage Institute of South Africa. There isn't a building, there isn't a structure, but what there is is a collective of South Africans that have been involved in the liberation struggle in the past, that have come together from different political parties. We were registered by the Master of the Court. We registered a trust. We were hoping that Emangena was going to join us, but he dashed. I didn't know at what point he was no longer with us. We were able to launch NALISA on the 22nd of July this year. After working for 2.5 years or more, really with no full-time staff, but with a collective of South Africans determined to preserve the archival material deposited by our founding president, Tate Utata Mandela, a forte. So we work with the National Heritage and Cultural Studies Center at Fort Hare. They look after the archives from all these different political parties. And we are now onto the appointing of a team of South Africans with the right skills for the digitization on an ongoing basis of these archives, so that they can be better preserved than in the past, for being able to access them, enable scholarship to continuously engage and utilize them. So I suggest, colleagues, that we should consider some of the issues I've touched on as a basis of identifying and agreeing on the pillars that must prop up a framework that can be agreed, that we should continuously be probing the question, now after so many years of democracy, how do we? Because in the party I belong to, for the past 3 decades, there was no dedicated structure for the work on culture and heritage. What was done would be just something you are tasked to do quickly, go and represent us there. But this year, we did participate in a dedicated commission to start regrouping and having delegates from the branches on the ground coming to talk about this important business of our culture and our heritage. That's apart from the liberation heritage issues that I was talking about emanating from the archives and their preservation. So we are going to the December conference in the ANC. That is where policy, after having been generated from branches and papers that had been prepared to generate debates, coming to a policy conference, you then get to the national conference. And that conference is going to look at the outcome of what is brought to them. And then we are looking forward to the creation of a dedicated vehicle under the new NEC, and I will no longer be there, but I think there are enough people that have an interest, have a passion to take this work forward, and of course we will always participate. So, Chairperson, I hope and Moshanga, I didn't mess you up too much, ne? Not entirely. By how many minutes did I go over? So thank you very much for your attention and for being here and being interested in this very, very important discussion. I hope to be invited in the future.
Thank you very much, Mbalega Mbete. I think you've said a mouthful. Thank you for the resounding words and for reminding us that we have to reclaim the values of Ubuntu and live these values and show them, express them in our communities, that we should be able to express values of care, respect, you know, for one another. Thank you for those resounding words, and also thank you for reminding us about we need to pay attention on the role of women in the development agenda within our society, and also the role of women in the preservation of our heritage. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, we will be proceeding with our program. We still have just 3 more panelists to reflect on their themes, and also the question of conservation and promotion of heritage. But I'm going to request that we do just a 1-minute break to allow our colleagues to bring in and usher in the food so that it doesn't interrupt the flow of the discussion. We give them space to do that. And whilst they're doing that, can I ask that we request our musical, or perhaps let's have a music item rendered as well there. Thanks. Just 1 minute, and then we can proceed with the rest of our agenda. Thank you very much. Give yourself a round of applause. Yeah?
The outside bit is connected. Bibilo sukulwe singabiwona. Hlala nicinga ngawe babe. Ndizama ukukufonela kodwa ayiphumeli. Jonga ndiyazi ndiqumbele ngezenzo zam, impazamo ziyenzeka, cela undixolele baby, buyela kum.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we take this item right at the end? Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sibusiso Mbangeni. Heritage is in hereditary, so this is my brother.
Excellent.
Give it up to Ukubevu.
Thank you very much.
Because
Much appreciated indeed. Thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, I see that you are all settled now and nourishments have been served. Let's proceed with the rest of our agenda here. We will take the next presenter, and the next presenter is quite an activist and also known as the heritage practitioner in Southern Africa and also the continent itself, but also he's doing a great job in terms of profiling and putting us as the continent on the map of global heritage management. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome to the podium Mr. Varisu, who is the head of the Africa World Heritage Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manetsi. Mine will be straightforward, and let me first use this opportunity to salute the veterans and all the distinguished guests that are here. You will see through my English that it's not easy for me because I'm a Yoruba speaker by language. I'm from Benin, which is a country colonized by French, and I have now to speak to address English speakers, not English speakers, actually Zulu, Soto speakers in English. Those is not that easy, but I will try my best by starting saying the Sawubona, Ndumelang, Jambo. Jambo is from Kenya. It means also Jambo. Say hello. You also have Nangadev. That's in Senegal. It's exactly like Sawubona. We also say Ekale in my language, which is Yoruba. I'm just using those words because for me, this is the first heritage. As an African, how do we take forward? Which step do we make to embrace that? Not South Africa, let me take you out a little bit of the comfort zone, if I can say, of South Africa and make it broader. Talk of African as a continent. What makes us African? Am I able, as an African, to speak another African language? That's one criteria for my own assessments. Which effort am I doing to reach that level? That's one thing. Another thing that I would like to highlight to assess my own Africanness or Africanity. We have a number of places in Africa that are reflecting our common, our shared values, like it said, in the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, our common heritage. You have places on our continent that are telling our stories as human beings. You know that human beings born in Africa, not only as hominide, as we say, but also as modern human being. Modern human being is born in Africa. And the place of birth is in many parts of our continent, from Chad, Central Africa, to Ethiopia, to Tanzania, to Kenya, and here to Maropeng, Stekfontein, and all that. So as an African, do I know those places, or at least am I showing interest as an African with an open mind? You have other places which are talking to other realities. Honorable spoke about the whole concept of Ubuntu, which is indeed is a shared value in the world, but most importantly in Africa. The same Ubuntu word is named differently in other African countries, but showing exactly the same significance. You have the whole concept, for instance, of teranga in Senegal. It's exactly the same thing. Oh, I forgot to say salam alaikum. Okay. Barakatuhu. Okay, I can see people know. So you have that concept of Ubuntu, which is very strong. You have it also in another part here, just around the corner here, Utu. Utu is the same concept, Ubuntu, but in Swahili. If I say Utu, in fact, I'm also referring to the whole migrations. Africa is a country of migrations, where you have a number of historic migrations, and one of them is what we call Bantu Migration. If I'm just trying to say Ubuntu, Untu, you have it in Swahili, which means exactly the same thing. Swahili being spoken in Tanzania, Kenya, in part in DRC, but you also have it in Kikuyu, Umundu. You have it here in Shona, they also say Unhu. You have a number of names of the same reality. But that shows once again what is that sense of togetherness, of generous humanity that we have as Africans. So another criteria of assessment is, how good am I to show that Africanity through Ubuntu? And this is something that we must be assessing ourselves against every day as an African. And then lastly, because I don't want to take too much of your time, there are also other places on the continent that I think as Africans we really need to know. We have one here around the corner, the couple, let's call it Great Zimbabwe. What's the equivalent in South Africa? The forefather of Great Zimbabwe. It's in Mapungubwe, Great Zimbabwe. That's a place that I think, as an African, we have to know. You go there, and then you just realize that more than 1,000 years ago, people were already extremely skillful on how to put together a city and be involved in international, trade. So those skills are not necessarily coming from outside. You go to another place like Timbuktu in Mali, it was alluded to, where you have a concentration of knowledge power. It's still there through the Manuscript, through the social organization, in spite of the insecurity situation which is there. You go to another place like the Lalibela churches in Ethiopia. You have 11 churches that are crafts in the rock. They are crafts. And this shows that people they master some tools like metallurgy, how to use iron, how to craft things in the rock. You go to another place like the pyramids in Egypt. It's in Africa. And the most beautiful pyramids actually are even in Sudan. It's not even in Egypt. You see, and so you also realize that things that we are taught today, like mathematics, physics, physical science, and all those things, they're already there. Geometry is there. You go to a place like Virunga Park in DRC, then you can see through the gorilla that are there, but also all what they call that, green economy. It's not only Virunga National Park, you have in Salonga, you have a lot of places there that are showing where, for instance, the oxygen, the air that we are breathing, and which, by the way, is our first heritage. The air that we are breathing is coming also partly because of that concentration of forestry that we have in some part of our continent. And as Africans then, I think we have to pray to preserve and keep all those treasures, being natural, being cultural, as whole as possible. I'm working on an organization that is mandated to take care of those places, to identify them, take care of them, but those places that are of what Graham said before, are of outstanding universal value. So by saying outstanding universal value, that means that us as Africans, what do we have which is so precious that we want to share with the world as our treasures, but those things have to express whom we are, and that's why I like what we are doing in this country through the liberation heritage. Robben Island is one of them, but you have another places that would express place of imprisonment, place of negotiation, place of liberation, place of this. You have it here in South Africa. You have it in Angola, through Kweto Kwana Valley. You have it in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique. You have it in Cape Verde, through what they call the concentration camp of Terafal. You have it in Ethiopia through the Adwa places. You have a number of places like that on the continent that I believe, will show us as true Africans, sharing Africa's value, so that we go a little bit out of our countries that are politically, constituted through colonization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Variso, the head of the Africa World Heritage Fund. I think he's really touched on a nerve here to say that we've got this phenomena, a way of life, a philosophy called Ubuntu, and it's a universal one, and that we all need to embrace it so that we are able to foreground our interest into the world, also into the global heritage space. Before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome on the floor here virtually our next guest speaker, Ndate Porano, who is a heritage practitioner of note, a scholar as well, and also a former head of the National Monuments and Museums of Botswana. He's served in various portfolios within UNESCO and various other multinational platforms for heritage conservation and management. Over to you, Mr. Porana. You are welcome. We can see you.
Thank you very much, Ramanet. I'm supposed to speak to the theme on heritage as a resource for peace building and people-to-people cooperation, with sub-themes on social cohesion, solidarity, nation building, patriotism, reconciliation, and healing. I'll try to define this according to my understanding, so that when we continue, we understand each other. But as a preamble, maybe I will also echo what was said by Manyana and Dr. Dominic. Manyana talked about denial of the self. Dominic talked about lack of inclusiveness of heritage. I'll also talk about the officialization of development and officialization of heritage. Even though heritage belongs to people, we see that there are some people who have taken it over to use it for their own benefit. the South African mind for over 200 years. We participated in the industrialization of South Africa. Many people in the region were part and parcel of the South African heritage with regard to imprisonment in the treason crime. Others went to Robben Island together. You are aware also of Masiri. You are aware also of Matola. You are aware also of the Gaborone 1985 massacre of people who supported the resistance against apartheid. So I think that becomes a preamble to say, if we talk about heritage, we should be able to know that we have heritage that we share as a region and as a continent. What is social cohesion? For me, social cohesion means the strength of relationships and the sense of solidarity amongst community members. And an indicator of social cohesion is the amount of social capital that you have. We will talk to that. And solidarity obviously refers to mutual support within the group or community. Nation building, of course, refers to an undertaking by a state to develop social economic institutions. But you find that when you look at our heritage as a region, we have developed social economic, political, and judicial institutions on the flag, national anthem, coat of arms, and of course on the Dutch Roman law, without developing institutions on the basis of our own laws as a nation. Patriotism, of course, means the devotion to and vigorous support to one's country. But we know regionally now, it's a devotion to a party, not to a country. This is something that as cultural experts, we need to look at and say, what do we mean by patriotism? And of course, reconciliation is the restoration of friendly relations. Others would go further and say, if we have to restore relationships, if we can refer to the late who was doing the poem, we might be reparations. Reconciliation does not mean that we should not tell what the past looked like. And of course, healing is a process of becoming one. Now, if we are talking about the indicators of social cohesion, in our societies in the region, we used to have economic and financial strengths that we used to support each other and that we used to take others from being downtrodden and to manage their lives in society better. Those who know Setswana, they know that we have Mafisa system. And Mafisa system was a system in which if you had cattle and your neighbor didn't, you give him 2 or 3 to use to help and support his or her family. To use Mafisa as draft power to plow and produce food for the economy. Those, of course, reduced social conflict share the Orange, we share the Okavango, we share the Limpopo. These are big rivers that we can use to make films, to make festivals. There are technologies which have been developed within the riverine which we could use in the region to develop ourselves. But within these rivers, we also have languages which are similar to each other. From Mafeking to the border between Botswana and Namibia, you have Bataro, you have Barolong, you have people who speak the same language, stretching over 2,000 kilometers. But these are things that we are not looking at. I think I'll look at the issue of heritage in silencing of the guns, just to throw one of issue. At the end, heritage is a resource for development. Somebody, I think it's Dr. Gomley, he talked about World Heritage Listing. World Heritage Listing is a crème de la crème, something that is wanted by everybody. And therefore it's something that as a region, we should look at and see what we can do as transboundary listing. Listing process is very expensive. We should look at it at regional level. When you look at towns like Rome and Venice, they are based on heritage tourism. This is what we should be doing also as a region. For example, somebody talked about Cape Town. Cape Town, let me say the Cape area is the meeting place for the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. The Kalahari, the Griquas, Cape Farms, and the like. This is a huge heritage. The resistance against foreign invaders was started in the Cape. This is a huge heritage that we can utilize. And of course, lastly, the transboundary heritage sites can be used to invigorate regional economic development, but there is need for a policy position. When we look at the Latin Americans, they have developed the Andean road system, which encompasses Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Huge. It's a huge area that, now you develop heritage around that area. This is what we should be looking at. In the SADC region, we know people who left their areas like Mzirikazi, Mumia, Nesibetwani, but in history books, they are taken as marauders, people who went around Costa Harbor. No, this was the time of state building. And we can utilize that history to develop our region. It's important to understand Mushweshwe's combined diplomacy and military strategy. in one or two words and ideas to say there is a possibility that we can utilize heritage for development. Many countries, especially in Europe, they have tended to make heritage listing especially and heritage utilization very expensive because they know its value. It's time that we as Africans should understand the importance of heritage and use it for social development. We should look at it as transboundary so that we can add value to the process. We have in our museums a lot of heritage, a lot of cultural resources, which are not put outside for exhibition for people to share, to come and watch and pay to come so that our institutions do have money. On many occasions you hear people say, heritage doesn't make money. Heritage can make money. Heritage can make, contribute to economic development. If we want to do that, if we want to bring our young people, our women, our intellectuals, our researchers into the fold to think with them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for those insightful thoughts, but also you are leaving us with something to ponder on, that indeed we should always remind ourselves that we are interconnected, and also what is linking us is basically the values of social cohesion, and we need to live those values. They say social cohesion is not an event, it's a process towards nation building. So indeed, thank you for those words. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to invite to the podium our next and last panel speaker. She is a scholar of note, especially in indigenous knowledge systems. She's been a cultural and a heritage practitioner for as long as I joined the field 22 years ago. And she's been a very committed and dedicated member of the formation of the Freedom Park that we see since its inception to where it is. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, can we welcome Ms. Mufmadi.
Thank you, Program Director. Want to acknowledge our former Speaker of National Assembly, Mambete, our Speaker, Dr. Mangena, the Chairperson of the National Heritage Council, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm aware that I'm standing between you and moving towards conclusion, so I'll try to be brief. A lot has been said by the many speakers that have come before me. That's the nice part of being the last speaker. I can just say, Langandela Bakom. Dr. Lukwarini will interpret. I'm going to touch on various aspects on the value of heritage also for social cohesion and nation building. Maybe the first aspect I'm going to look at is issues around social community disintegration. Why are we so disjointed? Why are we so kind of falling apart as communities? Obviously, especially from our African Black communities, the first cause we can trace it back to our historical factors, but also the major development in the body politic, especially in South Africa. What has been happening in the recent past, our loss of values. For example, if we look at the serious problem of family breakdowns, either due to various forms of separation, single parenthood, and so forth and so forth. And we know that traditionally, in terms of our indigenous knowledge, the concept of single parenthood, it's foreign, because a child is a child of the family and the community. But because we have lost that, you have mothers who are struggling to raise their children without the support of the clan or the communities, and therefore we have these challenges that we're talking about. But Indigenous people have their own schools for socialization, our rites of passage, which we have obviously done away with to a large extent. But when we did that, we didn't have an alternative strategy, so that that socialization that takes place in this school is replaced. And we know that our curriculum, our education system, does not necessarily focus on the socialization. And obviously, the current form of education itself, it's very, we go to university and schools to be certificated, not to be educated. So that essence of what education should be in resolving community challenges, it's not there. We have lost it. Maybe we need to reevaluate. Other people will tell you that communities are disintegrating because of the social disintegration, the socio-economic conditions on the ground. I think that is partially right, but I don't fully agree with that. In the sense that if you look at our rural communities, where the high rate of unemployment is worse compared maybe to the cities and so forth, most of these traditional communities have really put their communities and kept them intact through obviously the custodianship and the guardianship of traditional leaders. And I think we need to commend that of traditional leaders. Within certain communities, everybody knows how to conduct themselves. I'm sure you know, even when you attend a funeral in a particular community, there are rules of engagement, how to conduct yourselves, and so forth. They've really kept that. These are aspects and practices that in our peri-urban areas are no longer there. And that results in many challenges. The historical democratic influences, of course, where we know also that as a nation, we carry deep scars. We come from a history where we were brutalized mentally, physically, and otherwise. And we know that there was a clear decision to divide us, to make us feel worthless. If you don't see yourself as a person of value, you can't see that in another person. If you're not grounded in who you are, in understanding who you are, you cannot be able to respect the next person. So that socialization, that brutalization requires us to re-engineer, re-educate ourselves and rediscover who we are. The other aspect that I just want to briefly touch on is the aspect of tribalism and racism. Just a few days ago, we were with the Human Rights Commission. They were launching the, they call it SHINE, Social Harmony Network Effort, where they're trying to rally communities behind social harmony. And their slogan is simple, Sawubona, where they are saying we no longer even greet each other. Yet in the greeting, in our greetings carry a lot of message in terms of who we are. That is why most of our greetings, it's not in a singular form. When you greet me in my language, if you say Huitahane, I will say Rihone. I respond in plural. Have we ever asked ourselves why we do that? But in this interaction, the Deputy Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Mayor Chauhan, made something very profound, and she said that we are simply too diverse, too divided by race, ethnicity, class, and belief systems. We hold no shared values and can display no sense of shared and binding ethos. There is no South African dream or a singular social more I think Tate Mangena spoke about that. And she says that that makes it difficult to find a consensus on any matter, let alone upholding of the rule of law that is enshrined in our democracy. And she says that Americans, irrespective of where they come from, poor, rich, any color, they have the American dream. Whether it becomes a reality for them, they have something that they all look forward to. That's something that binds them. The British pays their respect to the king and the country. That, for them, it's the bottom line. So they have something that binds them as a nation. What is it that we have as South Africans? Do we have anything that we all strive towards collectively? And I think we can learn a lot from our liberation movements. They had a vision, they had a goal, and they knew what they wanted to do. What is it that we want now, and how do we attain that? That is part of heritage. They have bequeathed in us that ability to identify a vision, shared values that we can all fight and strive for. And this is what is lacking currently in our societies. And some other aspects relates to issues of gender-based violence and conflicts within our communities. I've heard many people talk about the harmful practices from our cultures and traditions. And yes, they are. We know some of the practices are harmful. But I think sometimes the context is misinterpreted. And we misunderstand a lot what the real essence of our cultural practices and ethos are. There are negative practices where some communities think women must be treated as children, who must be mentored, who must be disciplined if they do something wrong. But we all know that Africans are not originally patriarchal. There are many scholars who argue that patriarchy came with colonialization and Christianity, and it was adopted into our cultures. That is why we have had many queens. We have had many women warriors. If we were so patriarchal, especially in the past, how did we come up with such warriors of women who fought wars, who led communities, and so forth? But currently we do have snippets of these practices where women still have probably symbolic power, but we are not harnessing that. If you look at, and Dr. Mangena touched a bit on that, if you look at our marriage rights, lobola, and when a woman is married into a family, they will even give you a name that is meaningful, that identifies and defines your role, either as a leader. Some will give you a name after your mother-in-law. That means that if you are, in essence, a mother in this family, you cannot be abused. Because when your husband abuses you, they're abusing their mother. Some communities, lobola is not paid by the husband fully. It's either when the sister was married, the lobola that married your sister will be used to marry your wife. Therefore, you don't own your wife. Therefore, we tend to trivialize our cultures because we have lost the essence of the real practices and how things were done and why. If you look at the Bavenda communities, for example, and I think a bit in the Botswana and the Bapedi, the paternal aunt, Makazi, is the leader and the head of the family, not the husband. Even in the kingship, the king is not the leader. Makazi is. She makes all these decisions. The king becomes a spokesperson, and Makazi can veto any decision that the king takes. Even within the communities, that is the practice. The question is, why are we not harnessing these practices that empowers women, that brings back the women's dignity to their position, and we stop saying you are married, therefore you can be abused because you were bought. No one buys anyone. And lobola, when it comes to the family, there was a manner in which it was distributed to that family. And also even in other communities, the couple will be given a portion as a startup to their new family. So we have lost a lot, and we need to revisit some of these ethos that we think are outdated. He was again talking about Dr. Mangena. I think issues around weddings, where we have two weddings, traditional and white wedding. I love to use that example, where we think traditional and so-called white wedding. White wedding is somebody's traditional wedding. But we feel like if we use our own traditional ways, as Mama Mbete was also talking, as she was sharing how Mama Jinwala used to conduct herself, we think we have not done enough and we are not sufficiently married. I think we need to revisit who we are and find out where we come from and what needs to be done within communities. And that again will address issues of lawlessness within communities. And as I've said before, we were born out of divisions, and these were deliberately done. So we need some form of healing. And Mr. Swaibo also talked about the decolonization of the mind. Many people, when you talk about going back to your roots, they think you want to freeze in the past. That is not what heritage is all about. While heritage maintains certain permanency, which links you to those who came before you, it is always dynamic. It is always being enriched and changing with the context. So you make your own heritage, but you retain a common thread to who you are and where you come from in terms of the generations and the practices. As long as you understand the essence of why things are done the way they do, which I think that is what we have lost, then we are good to go. If you look at developed countries, look at China. You can talk about the UK. You saw the burial rites of the Queen. These countries are developed because they anchor their development agenda on their own heritage and practices. It's not two separate agendas where your heritage can be put aside and then something else and policies will come for a development agenda. Development agenda is based on who they are and their practices, and that is why they're able to sustain it. So we live in two worlds, and you can see in our rural communities where you have traditional leaders and you have councillors, especially in local government, where we don't seem to know how to handle the two. We say on word and in paper that we acknowledge traditional leaders, but we have taken away the power. And some of them are actually doing much better in service delivery for their people, as opposed to us. How do we integrate that system into our governance systems? If we are Africans, we are free, we are emancipating our own voices. How then do we negate our cultural practices and adopt those that are foreign? As I conclude, I just want to say, Mambaleka, but also most of the speakers spoke about the value of Ubuntu as the anchoring value. And I think this is our legacy in terms of heritage that has been bequeathed to us, which probably she shared personal stories and her experiences in different aspects. But if you listened carefully, everything she was talking about was about Ubuntu and how communities are able to organize themselves beyond difference, whether political, cultural, and otherwise, because that is what Ubuntu is all about. Ubuntu enjoins us to promote and gives us an obligation as humans to look after somebody's welfare, your neighbor, as she was saying. It enjoins us to take responsibility for ourselves, for our neighbors, but also for the environment. It is a recognition of the significance of each and every human life, the need for humans to take care of one another as social beings, and also the need to take care of the environment that surrounds them. Often, as we say, mutu ndi mutu ngabatu, a person is a person through others. I am because I belong. Therefore, it is a recognition that without that sense of belonging, you are not fully human. And that is what we need to understand. You are also not fully humane. And that is why we brutalize each other, because we have lost that essence, that soul that makes us human. Because through Ubuntu, we realize that humanity is not simply biological, but largely a product of socialization and also a promotion of good social values. It enshrines in us community responsibility, but within Ubuntu, human rights are also ensured, as I've indicated, because if you respect another life and another person, then certain things you know you will not do to the next person. So this philosophy, I believe, program director, that it is our national living heritage. We need to find a way to recapture it, but we need to decidedly find a way that we invest programs that will bring back the sense of Ubuntu as our common shared value. Sis Jessica, in her praise earlier on, she quoted Marcus Garvey, who says that a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture are like a tree without roots. Let's remember that our heritage is fragile. If we are not careful, we will lose it and lose ourselves. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mafumadi. I think you've really said a mouthful, and I'm not going to attempt to reiterate what you have said, but a takeaway for us here is that we have to really foreground the values of Ubuntu in order to build a society, but at the same time, take cognizance of the fact that culture and heritage should not be used to suppress other people. We should use culture to unlock the wealth of people and also their creative geniuses, but also respecting humanity at large. Thank you for those resounding words and insightful input. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached that point of our program. We have concluded with our presentations from our speakers. Can we give them a round of applause once more? Because of in the interest of time also, and also because we live in this dynamic environment of the fourth industrial revolution, I'm gonna open the floor to 2 inputs or questions or reflections because we said we came to a dialogue. So a dialogue can't be one-sided. We need to at least hear a voice from the audience so that we take that. But at the same time, because technology is enabling, we have established platforms where you can actually submit your questions, your inputs, your reflections as well, because this is an ongoing initiative. It's an ongoing engagement with yourselves so that it can help us shape our programming as the Heritage Council, but also as a sector as well. Ultimately, what we want to do and what we want to achieve as a tangible outcome of this engagement is that we need to have a plan of action with key deliverables that will actually help us advance all the areas that we have touched upon to advance also the cause of African heritage within our society. With that being said, with the show of hands, can I request that we take at least 2 inputs or questions? There's a hand there, there's 1 and 2. Can I just take those 2? And then we will definitely open the floor for response. But most importantly, please submit your inputs and questions electronically via our platforms that we have created. I think that is in order, CEO. I don't know whether I have, but we are not cutting you out. Technology is enabling. Let's use it to empower ourselves as well. Let's use it as a tool to communicate with the Heritage Council. This is not the end. So this is just the beginning of our engagement. We will take the first question, ma'am. Maybe when you ask your question, maybe state who you are and which organization you come from or community you come from. I think that will be useful, it will be helpful as well. Thank you.
Sanibonani,
Sabona ma.
ninjani?
Sikhona ma.
Okhulumayo uBishop Penindlovu from the religious sector, part of the Kara Institute in the CRA and also in the FPO Gauteng, the office of MEC Unomantura Lohoko. What I would like to say is that you can not be a human being and not become a spiritual being. I don't know whether mine will be a question or a comment, but I think mostly it will be a comment. Ngifuna ukusho ukuthi as spiritual beings, South Africa, we should start heal the spiritual part of us. And I'm very happy, that's why I wanted to raise my hand first, because kukhona umamu wase Freedom Park. Yeah, because I've been saying this for more than 10 years. I think if Freedom Park, it's our sacred place. And as a sacred place, that's where we need to go and do izinto zethu zakwantu or our heritage. You know, I was once a student or lectured by the late Treya Koka. We used to have what we called Ikwanza Festival, the blessing of the tools. So angazi ndayigcina ngalesa sikhathi esaphila asisayiboni. That's why indlala ne-drought is khathile kule country yethu, because we don't keep our culture, izinto ekufanele ukuthi sizenze. And what I would like to say is that being spiritual beings, if Freedom Park is our heritage site and our sacred place, we shouldn't be gathering here in this time of the day and in this time of the month and in this heritage. We should be going lapaya. Yes, you're nabo tatu langalibalele dube. Yes, you're nabo pixliga seme. We should raise our own. Sikhulume nabaphansi bethu. Yes, kumisimpepa mambalega mbete. Yes, teteng nezinyanya. Yes, kaligusha ne bokwe nenkomo. We have 9 provinces. That is why Izwelethu lingalendlela eliyilis piti. Because if we have to heal people, we should heal our spirits first. We should go for a healing session first. Uyo cleanser the country. Kulezinto esibuya kuzo. You know, even the mind of the people are not cleansed. We've got our heritage site of the river, which is called Ival River, whereby omunye nomunye uma ngabe ezawufuna amanzi etepini. I think the water comes from there. If we have to do a ritual of the country and take the ashes, put them there, we don't aqhela abantu kodwa siqhela ibhokwe, and then we do mina nkemupostolo wama wapadiatla. And I believe in uma ngabe sikhuluma noNkulunkulu re tshwanetse re etse dichiso re kope tshwarelo ko Modimo re bue dintho tse tshwanetseng ko Modimo re lefatshe la rona le khone ho utlwisisa. But at this time of the day, my plea is that asibuyele masisweni ukuze ubuntu noma ngabe sikhuluma nabadala sizawicela naleyo nto, because we have been praying
and praying siyenzile imithandazo eminingi but awukho shintsho ikhona into eshodayo. Let's go back to our sacred place and do what is supposed to be, because I've prophesied this since 2016. When you go to government officials, they say we don't have a budget. Every time akukho budget, but ngoku sija ilethisi nenantsika. So akube ne budget yokuxhela izimvu ezi9 nezinkomo ezi9 and do what is supposed to be as our culture.
Siyabonga gogo. Siyabonga kakhulu gogo, yeah. I think ugogo hers was more of an input so that we can improve as institutions that are entrusted with cultural heritage management. At least she's giving us a direction, a solution how we can improve. Thank you very much, Gogo. The next question or input or
all right.
comment?
Thank you, everyone. Libitso laka, my name is Kuku Mama Bolo. Wahara Malepe. I'm a descendant of Khoshi Muchaji, Khoshi Amasadi. I'm from the Heritage Council. I also sit in Women in Tourism. My question, basically, I'm going to start with Women in Tourism. We are here today in Africa. We still eat or being served English breakfast in Africa. And there is no indigenous breakfast. So my question and my plea from the executive, what is it that you are doing to empower women? Because within the African context, kibo mama or kibo me baba piang, and the education that we have is only to cook indigenous food vis-a-vis the English breakfast. So we're asking for the support in tourism from executive to say support women in tourism with their indigenous knowledges. And then the other one is just the comment to say, can African calendar be integrated with the Gregory calendar that we are currently using in South Africa? Because that itself, how do you know your roots if you don't know your time? And how will you get to your destination if you don't know where you are, what time is it? I'm going to just give an example with the Christmas. The Christmas in South Africa. Normally, Father Christmas, he's wearing a gown. And that time is summer in South Africa because we are in Africa. It doesn't talk to us. So it's very important for all of us to actually integrate and support other stakeholders within indigenous knowledges to know our root, to know where we're coming from, because we're not going to get to any destination as long as we don't know where we are coming from. And I thank you. Libitso laka ke nna gogo Mama Bolo, wa bo mojaji, ke a le leboga bagolo thobela.
Ra leboga mme. Ra leboga pula.
Pula!
Ayine.
Thank you.
No ra leboga gagolo. I don't know at this point in time if maybe we need to reflect on the last point. But if not, remember we said this is not the end of this session. You still have time to submit your written inputs. You still also have time also to come to our offices. We are based in Hatfield and we operate on an open door policy. We are there to serve you as the members of the society, but most importantly as Africans as well. So this is not the end, ladies and gentlemen, but because of the limitations of time, I would like us to really take that opportunity, you know, to always be cultural activists in our own corners, in our own spaces as well. Heritage is not just a responsibility of the state, it is also our responsibility as well to show that we actually are able to promote and safeguard our African heritage. I always say that when our kids come from the multiracial schools and they come home in the afternoon, we still carry on talking to them in English. So charity begins at home. Let's change that. Let's take them back to Marupeng and talk to them in our own vernacular indigenous languages so that they grow to be proud South Africans and Africans going forward. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite back to the podium again our CEO to carry on with the rest of the program because we're nearing the end now, and then we can wrap up. With that said, let's give ourselves a round of applause.
Okay, the music will come. I think let's allow our chairperson to formally thank the guests and close, and then we can then nyakaza. Okay, chairperson.
Ityonto zobawo sithe nkosi ngokuvuselela izazela zakwethu ngale mvabi ihlukuhlwa ngama-Afrika nengqondo ngaphandle kwenu sophala lisizwe sikakhushe. You are the gold, you are the regional gold, you are the continental gold, you are the African gold, you are the global gold. As the ancient times of Egypt, where the oldest gold artifact dating 1352 BC to the ancient golden rhine of Mapungubwe found in the royal graves of our African kings and queens, to all the astronauts that explore global planet with courage and resilience. Today, siyachila siyachocha, siyangunga siyangumshela, sithi pula, pula ya muchachi, pula ya barolong, pula ya mushwashwa ila, pula kasenza ngakhona, pula kayitsa kaphalo kakhawuta kakhakhabe kangqeka.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause? Also to appreciate, can we stand up and give a standing ovation to all our speakers? Please, please, please appreciate our speakers, especially, our two elders, Ntate Mangena, Lim Mambete. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your leadership, but much more for your humility. You really lead by example, and we didn't feel very heavy, although you are very weighty people, but you came in simplicity, and thank you so much. It's always an encouragement to be around you and to see you continue to serve the nation in the way you've been doing for so many years. We appreciate you so much. Let's give them a hand, please. You may be seated. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all our speakers, and in the interest of time, I actually need to take responsibility and apologize. You can't really have a colloquium of this nature in 2 hours. And I think that was really a mistake. And CEO, I believe that we have learned from this and we can really do better. I think we needed a full day of conversations. And I could see, already the heated questions and comments that were coming from the floor. It was really sad to see that, being cut off. My friend Graham had a powerful speech which we will need, and CEO, we have a resource in the NHC that we need to really use much more. Others will think about people like this when they are no longer on council, but this is a resource within council that would be very useful, and we need to tap into this knowledge. And thank you to all the speakers. Mr. Variso, thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And Makazi Jane, and I saw you were canvassing for the Makazi Power back, so we'll talk about that. So Makazi Power must come back. No, I think there's a confirmation there. So we need to have a CODESA around the Makazi Power. I think we need to reinstitute that in our communities. Very interesting issues that have come up today. Very insightful points that have really come up, and those of you that are academic, you have many theses, that have really just been generated over this meeting. And those of you that are students, you can't run out of, research questions with all these critical issues and points that have come up from these discussions. And I think there's a lot that has come up, Dr. Manesi, that we need to really, really document. And if you can also take acting DDG, back to the department, these discussions and some of the critical issues that have come, also from our leaders as well, just to really take forward. And for the minister, who should have been here, unfortunately had an international engagement, could be alerted about some of these critical issues that are coming up from the floor and from our speakers. I think this was really, really a mouthful and food for thought for all of us, and really appreciate your participation, your coming here. We do appreciate and acknowledge that time is really, really way out and gone, and that's why we're trying to shorten the program. But much appreciation. I have students from UP, from the SRC. Thank you guys, and thank you so much for coming. Do we have other students as well from UNISA? If you're here, just raise your hands. There you go. Thank you so much. And you guys are the future. I hope you're picking up some really good points and vibes from these discussions, which we need to take forward in our engagements for the future. But appreciation, CEO, for this organization, Mr. Ngobo. And thank you so much for putting this together. It's been a very busy year, and I know a very busy month as well. We've been all over the country, especially Mbete, following up on our, liberation heritage route. And you spoke a lot about that, and the many exciting plans that are coming up, around that. And we are looking forward to a great future. And our heritage really needs to be celebrated and upheld. And we need to make it the pride of our nations, even of our younger generations as well. We need to make it more accessible, more inviting, more interesting in how we present it. And that's what the NHC is trying to do through this council. We're trying to re-engineer the spirit of celebration, but also of knowledge generation and development in heritage issues as well. And thank you so much. I have some goodies that we want to present to some of our to our speakers. If we could have Tate Mangena, please, to come. Should I show it? Okay. Beautiful. I see you like your coffee, so this is for your coffee. Membete, please. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. She was a powerful speaker, and you guys must pick up from that. She was a no-nonsense speaker. And Mme Mfamadi Makazi. Graham, please, thank you so much. This man is a member of our council. He's an archivist.
Thank you.
Mr. Variso. Soyibo. Merci beaucoup. Okay, Ntate Parano, yours is coming and it will be delivered safely to you. Thank you so much for powerful points that you raised as well. Really appreciate you so much. Okay. Sis Jessie, where's she? Okay, she's got an amazing stage presence, eh? Amazing.
Dicula difuzu Jessica, Dicula difuzu Jessica, Dicula difuzu Jessica, Dibonga difuzu Jessica, Dibonga difuzu Tabawo, Dibonga difuzu Taba, Ebakula bongo Taba. I'm the role model, Urahati Wasitshaba. Tatebao, the heritage key point. You know what I mean? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Jesse. You've got great talent, and thank you so much. Thank you to everyone and who has come, those of you that have traveled from far. And do we have the University of Venda there? Where are they? Okay, that's great. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Any other university that is here? Super. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you. The announcement is that there is dinner is served, some really good food. So please don't leave without first, just enjoying yourself with the food. Praise. So can we stand up? Can we all stand up? Can we all stand up? And I want us to just reflect for a moment on what has been said and spoken today from Ubuntu and the principles and the beautiful stories that you so eloquently laid out, and how we need to go back to our origin, how the issue of respect and honor is so critical. And these are messages that must go to our nation and to the sad realities of the things that we see on the news every day. The disrespect of women and teachers and principals and policemen and women, and to the issues that you raised in Tate Mangena, from the cuisines, the food that we're going to have. And I know there was a point also on the food and the breakfast, and to the issues of initiation, indigenous languages, and how we've sort of neglected them, and how our kids are so proud. Not only our kids, but our parents actually are so proud to see their kids speaking in English, and we so pride ourselves to see that, but we have no pride, absolutely no pride in our own indigenous languages. So let us reflect in that, and in the spirit of that reflection, let us go back and be leaders in our own rights and uphold the heritage of this nation. Thank you so much.
Now it's the time for Malam Khudu